Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. Now, when last we spoke with members of the Shaw Foundation, and please look for it on our digital platforms if you have not seen that conversation as yet. Now, the term local economic development was used more than once. As we begin a new year full of resolutions and bright ideas, perhaps this is the one methodology that we can assimilate into our day-to-day. Now, we speak with President of the Shaw Foundation and economist, Dr. Rebecca Gookool, who joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Gookool, and all the best for this new year. I want us to start off, though, by defining local economic development and some of the major differences to other methodologies that may be generally employed. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you very much, DK. Good day to your guests. And I am always eager to talk about economics and development. So just as a little synopsis, localized economic development is a grassroots approach to development that takes into consideration what are the localized resources and how these resources can be leveraged to improve the economic, social, environmental outcomes of the people in a given area. It is different from the traditional approach to development because it takes both a bottoms up approach to development and matches it with efforts and matches it with the specific capabilities and capacities of a given area. The traditional approach to development is really top down, very unbiased, and it does not always meet the needs of a particular locale. And that's why we have differences in the levels of development across communities that is very obvious.
And I really like the fact that it seems as though bias is not always a bad thing. It depends on how you leverage it. And in terms of like,
Definitely.
And looking at the fact that there is different strokes for different folks, but identifying and getting those stakeholders together to form a strategy. I think sometimes when people say, okay, well, it's happening from grassroots, they may think, okay, well, it's not really thought out or it's just kind of ad hoc. How does getting those the implementing stakeholders into form that strategy, how does that take place? And I'm very happy to have you speak both as an economist and as president of the Shaw Foundation.
Definitely. So one of the things that I want to focus on in terms of the localized economic development strategy, and it is critical, is that empowerment brings buy-in. At the end of the day, when a group or when any type of stakeholder feels invested in the process of change and invested in the process of generating real value, then you have follow through, then you have buy-in, then you have changes to the culture of an environment. At the end of the day, we have all seen where Trinidad and Tobago is in terms of an economy. We have high and rising crime levels. Trinidad and Tobago in 2022 faced one of its highest murder levels ever, 613 murders, and that signals, it should signal to everyone involved that there is an inherent structural matter, an inherent structural flaw when it comes to these communities and remediating young people, remediating persons who have a tendency towards criminal activity. When you have resources, when you have the coming together, the tripartite approach to development, and tripartite in the sense that you have the business community, the civil society sector, and local government coming together to move in the same direction, what you have is a specifically targeted approach to dealing with the challenges in a given area. When you have that buy-in, the proximity of assistance and the proximity of things like mentorship, the proximity of things like resources to effect change gives you a better chance of sustainable movements towards an improved situation.
And I really like the fact that you talk about, say, okay, there's skin in the game. There's a buy-in, and how does that buy-in help a little more with regard to implementing and even monitoring to say, okay, well, this is what's happening, and we need to amend, we need to tweak this over time, and these are things that are working. Does that localized economic development make it a little easier to say, okay, well, if we need to change this, we can change it a little more rapidly if it's not coming down from the top down, but it's already there? What are some of those things we need to look at with regard to implementation?
Localized economic development is a very intuitive approach to development, and it is premised on the simple methods by which, for example, and I always go back to this example when I'm mentoring persons or when we are dealing with any type of activity. What happens in your household? For example, in my household where I'm an adult that has a decision making capacity, as adults, my husband and I, we make a decision, we work through the mechanics of how that decision is going to translate on a day-to-day basis. We continue to communicate, we adjust where necessary, and we effect an outcome. The same applies to a given community. When there is a recognition that resources are specific to an area, that there is a challenge or there is an opportunity to be invested in, we collectively communicate, we work together to say, hey, what am I bringing to the table? What are the resources? And those resources don't necessarily have to always be financial resources. It can be mentorship resources, it can be leadership resources, it can be space that can get or that can, and you can see movements towards the achievement of a collective goal. And that's where that approach, or the approach to localized economic development, on focusing on those key targeted metrics for a given locality, is an important one. Because when we all agree that this is a challenge, this is the direction that we are going, we hold each other accountable for progress, we hold each other accountable for responsibility.
And with that in mind, we take a short break. I want to talk about an enabling environment when we return, how it is we can hold each other accountable, how it is we can do some things so that a rising tide will float all boats. But we do that with Dr. Rebecca Gookool, looking at a localized economic development when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking with economist and president of the Shaw Foundation, Dr. Rebecca Gookool, and we're looking at localized economic development. And one of the things I wanted to get an idea of, yes, there may be key targeted metrics per varying locales, but what are some of the common factors that you see that go into creating an enabling environment for local economic development wherever that location would be?
Okay, so an enabling environment for localized economic development must include the focus on the long term. And so let me explain what that means. It's important for a collective vision to be adopted. It's important for a collective vision to be the foundation of the way in which stakeholders interact. Why? Because they are all going to be working towards a specific impact. In terms of some of our training, and I can only reflect on my experience actually writing development projects at the University of the West Indies. It's important for us to understand a vision, and really, how do we foresee, for example, what do we want our host community or home community, our country to look like in 3 years' time, and begin to work backwards to determine from an impact, what do we want to have Trinidad and Tobago look like in 2025? What has to happen in 2024? What has to happen in 2023 to be able to allow that vision to be achieved? This logical framework approach really links a specific output that you want to see in a project or an intervention with the impact of that output, the impact of that intervention with the outcome that we want to see over time.
And I smile when you talk about those incremental steps from getting from where you are to where you want to be. And what is the impact or the significance of starting small? And I say starting small, and I'm thinking specifically of shore babies, because sometimes you hear individuals saying, okay, well, we want to do something for the youths, but you don't talk to the youths to help develop those steps. But to tell me a little bit about shore babies and how that kind of, what is the vision for saying, okay, well, we're starting individuals on this path to entrepreneurship, to thinking about communities from this age, please?
Okay, so we all know that development does not happen overnight. Culture changes don't happen overnight. This process and principle of incrementation undergirds everything that we do. For example, and we can always say, we can say that where I am today, where we are as an economy, as an individual today, is because of the cumulative impact of the decisions that we have made, the cumulative impact of the decisions those who have gone before us have made. And this is where the principle, the economic principle of intergenerational equity and intergenerational sustainability comes in. Everything that I do within my community, every decision that I make in terms of building up assets or becoming more disciplined as a professional impacts on the younger ones that are coming up under me. This is the undergirding principle of our Shore Babies. The Shore Foundation was established in 2013 by Professor Roger Hossain. And one of the things that we realized when we were founding the organization was that while we can write about policy, effecting policy on the social and environmental level was not happening at the pace that we expected to see. The Shaw Foundation meets that need in terms of being able to focus on the ground level social and environmental and economic types of intervention premised on the principle of incrementation and recognizing the need to have intergenerational sustainability. Our Shaw Babies initiative started off, I think, last year during the summer, and we were observing that really what you had was a disconnect between the population and its association with agriculture. Of course, since 2020, we have been observing that there has been a marked negative impact on our food security situation, compounded by several global events. And of course, locally, when you do not have production increasing to cater for the loss in imports or to cater for the loss in access to agricultural and food resources, that puts us as an economy in a dangerous position. In rebuilding the culture of familiarity with agriculture, it was important for us to recognize that this does not happen overnight. It will not, of course, happen immediately, and as such, getting the familiarity attributes back into the culture of the young ones in terms of association, seeing a plant grow also teaches them important life skills that I think is oftentimes missing. So with our shore babies, each one of them, we had about 30 little ones under the age of 10, and each of them was given a grow box that we built with recycled pallets. We put soil in, we put them mulch in, and we also gave them some seedlings. So their little project over a period of 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, we had things like seasoning, pak choy, etc. They had to manage, they had to water, they had to take pictures of growth, they had to even do a little video in terms of their progress. And I know that you would have featured one of our little ones, Navia, who was very participative in our Shore Babies initiative.
And definitely that's something we want to do more of. Yes, so you spoke about it. So Navia would have featured or been featured on Generation Next, people who are charting the way forward. But in terms of like the 2 minutes that we have left, scaling up, where does local economic development or localized economic development intersect with our national vision or policy? Or how is the Shaw Foundation doing that in terms of moving through these different communities, but looking at the national landscape to make sure that this happens on a kind of holistic level?
Okay, and this is where looking at best practices is important. The Shaw Foundation has been working with key local government organizations. We understand that the approach to development must include civil society, which in this case is Shaw Foundation, the various regional corporations in the Southwest Peninsula that we've been able to partner with and partner with successfully, and local community groups, local business community groups that can bring some of the on the ground dynamic. I think what is important is, from a national perspective, is to understand what is required in terms of development and the nuances of employment, the nuances of unemployment specific to each one of the areas, and that, combine it with the resources that are available, combine it with the capacities that are specific to the community, and continue to allow for that tripartite conversation to happen, and include, for example, a community specific strategy. This was started several years ago with the CARI-led localized economic development officers, which were located in 6 or 7 regional communities, regional corporations. Some of these regional corporations still include a localized economic development officer. Their role, of course, is to effect that kind of change, understand what are the resources that are specific to the area, understand what are the challenges, and be able to coalesce and interact and be that intermediary to be able to deal with some of the area specific challenges. Localized economic development is by no means boring. It is by no means archaic or stiff. It is very organic. It is very specific, and it is premised on incrementation, buy-in, and the empowerment of the community towards a single improved vision of our nation.
It reminds me of something that Peter Telfer used to say, tiny do plenty, but we want to thank you and the Shaw Foundation, Dr. Rebecca Gookool, for the work that you're doing, giving us a little idea about a slightly different model of economic development that can pay immense dividends in Trinidad and Tobago. So with that, we also want to thank you from the entire TTT team. This has been In Depth with me. Thank you so much for joining us.